Good evening, everyone. Please be seated. Good evening. Item agenda number 1. Do I have any apologies? I've received apologies from Councillor Maureen Madden and Councillor Parker Leonard. Any more?
Yeah, Councillor Pam McIntyre and Councillor Sean Brockbank.
Chair.
Councillor Sterling. Move on to item agenda number 2, declarations of interest and dispensation. The Director of Law and Governance has written to all members to set out the position in regards to interests in matters of council, and will deal with the budget proposal in relation to registrable personal interests held where a member has been appointed an authority to an outside body or bodies. Dispensation has been granted to allow them time to participate and vote at any meetings in relation to the registrable personal interests and their membership of the body. Where members have been granted such dispensation, they are not required to declare these registrable personal interests or grant dispensation at this meeting. A list of appointments to the authorities, bodies and dispensations granted to members in respect of these appointments has been sent to all members. Do the members have any other interest to declare at this meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a personal interest to declare. I'm Director and employee of Justice Prince Community Interest Company, and we have contractual arrangements with North Tyneside Council. So I will leave the room when we go on to item 3 and not participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. I also an employee and director of Justice Prince Community Interest Company, and we have contractual arrangements with the authority, so we'll also leave on item 3.
Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. Item 3 of the agenda are the personal registrable interest in this item, and following advice, I leave the meeting when it's discussed. I've also filled in the relevant forms, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Early.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a registrable personal interest in, and I'm a trustee of North Tyneside Carer Centre, but it's not a paid position, so I will be remaining in the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Chair. It's a non-registrable personal interest as declared previously.
Councillor Wendy Lord.
A non-registrable personal, one of them as well.
Councillor Rankin.
Non-registrable personal interest as declared previously.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I have a registrable personal interest that I previously disclosed on my general register of interest, but I do some subcontracted work for VODA, who are part funded by the authority. I've sought some advice on that matter, and I've been told that I'm sufficiently distant to be able to participate in the meeting this evening.
Councillor Thurlow.
I have a registrable personal interest. I work for Parkside Care Limited, and a non-registrable personal interest as my father works for the authority.
Councillor Bournes.
I have a non-registrable personal interest as a member of my family works for the authority.
I'll declare an interest. My wife works for North Tyneside Citizens Advice. Yeah. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a non-executive member of Cullicoats Education Trust. I don't think that impinges on anything here, but just to be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll declare that my wife works at... I'm just going to... I'll declare my interest first. Sorry, Councillor Samuel. Declare interest in my wife works as an North Tyneside Citizens Advice and I work with Timeway Rescue Service. Councillor Samuel.
I have a non-registered personal interest as well. A member of my family works for the authority.
Anyone else? Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. I have a member from my family who works for the authority as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just make an announcement. There's been a change to the order of business this evening, and it's intended to take item 4, arrangements for appointments of local authority auditor and external auditor, first, followed by item agenda number 3. The 2022-2026 financial plan, budget process, elected mayor and cabinet budget and council tax requirements resolution. That's what I'm going first. Item agenda number 4. Right, item agenda number 4, arrangement for appointment for a local auditor, external auditor. Can Councillor Rankle move the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, the authority is required to appoint an auditor to audit its accounts each financial year. The authority's current appointment covers the financial year end 23. This report sets out proposals for appointing the external auditor for a 5-year period thereafter. The report outlines the options as follows for the authority. Arrange its own procurement and appoint, procure in conjunction with other bodies, or take advantage of the National Collective Scheme administered by PSAA. This is the recommended option in section 1.7, and the benefits of doing so are fully explained in the report. The authority only has until December 22 to appoint and finalise this. Should the authority decide to arrange its own procurement, sufficient time would be required to set up the audit panel and run the procurement and appointment process. There are also concerns about capacity and sustainability of the local audit market. Opting into the national scheme provides maximum opportunity for value for money and best quality through large-scale collective procurement. I ask Council to agree this recommendation set out at 1.7 of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Rangan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Johnson.
Right. Second of Reservoir, Speaker, Chair.
Do I have any questions? Invite members to speak to the motion. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. I note that the current external audit fees are of the order of £154,000 per annum. I think it is worthwhile pointing out that since the coalition government changed the arrangements for appointing auditors, external auditors, several years ago, the fees have fallen significantly, and there have been huge savings of the order of tens of thousands of pounds to this council, providing money for other services. I support this report. I think hopefully that will continue the procurement with a competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Anybody else like to speak? Can I invite them over the motion to exercise the right to reply?
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely right what Councillor Wallace says, although at the same time, as the numbers, fees have fallen, so has the number of auditors, which is why this problem's actually been created.
Can we now move to the vote? Agreed? All those in? Thank you. Now move on to item agenda number 3. This meeting, Council will consider the Cabinet's proposals in relation to the General Fund budget and resultant estimates of the amount of council tax requirements and any objections to the Cabinet proposals that have been submitted by the Conservative group. I will first of all require Councillor Rangel to move the Cabinet's proposals. Once those proposals are seconded, I will invite members to ask questions relating only to matters of principle and the Mayor's final amendments that have been circulated earlier this week for tonight's meeting. I will then take objections from the Conservative group. If the objection is approved by the Council, the meeting will end and a further Council meeting will be held on the 3rd of March 2022. If the objection is defeated by Council, I invite members to debate the Cabinet proposals and to vote on them. I would like to remind members that regulations are now in force requiring local authorities to have recorded and named votes on any decision at budget meetings relating to the budget of council tax. I now invite Councillor Rankin to move the Cabinet proposal. You have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not expecting this one to be as unanimous as the last one. I am pleased to present Cabinet's Budget and Council Tax Requirement Resolution for 2022-23. The budget reflects the key priorities of Our North Tyneside plan, a thriving, secure, family-friendly, caring and green North Tyneside. We have an ambitious plan to maximise support for those who need it most, whilst investing in all areas of the borough and continuing our recovery from the pandemic. The full financial impact of COVID is still not fully understood, and whilst there is now cause for some optimism, we know many local services such as adult social care and the transport system remain critically underfunded. Throughout the response to the pandemic, the Council has provided local leadership and taken action to maintain the delivery of vital services. Our budget will make North Tyneside an even greater place to live, work and visit. Investment in town centres will continue. Additional investment in roads and pavements agreed last year will continue. Investment in our plans for net zero will also continue. The budget builds on the recovery already achieved and ensures no detrimental impact to frontline services or closures of facilities. It confirms how we will manage the ongoing risks of COVID-19 and uncertainty around future levels of government funding. The medium-term financial plan has been updated to reflect the local government financial settlement, but huge uncertainty remains, making our financial planning extremely difficult. We have made the difficult decision to increase council tax. A 1.99% council tax increase and 1% adult social care precept is proposed. Be in no doubt, the government expects this as part of their core spending assumptions. I would point out, however, that if we receive just the average core spending level for English councils, we would have an additional £17 million worth of resources. It would be nice if this government funded us properly. Like our residents and businesses, we face challenges from high inflation. Our budget provides additional help for those working age residents who claim council tax support, as well as extending the backdated period to 26 weeks. We will provide a maximum of £150 towards their council tax bills. Thousands of residents will benefit from this. Whilst the budget includes the government's measures to help households in property bands A to D from rising energy costs, we will also operate a discretionary support scheme of over £500,000 to help those households not eligible for this scheme. We remain focused on inflation risk and propose to increase the contingency budget by £800,000 to provide further financial resilience. All elected members receive regular updates on council reserves. Much has been said in the media about the council holding £92 million in reserves in the context of the setting of council tax. At March 2022, the General Fund did indeed have £92 million in reserves. However, as was made clear, most of these balances are held for items such as PFI contracts or specific grant funding. They are not available for general use or for absorbing council tax freezes. It is illegal to use them as such. This leaves only our unring-fenced reserves. Our strategic reserve of £14.5 million has a minimum balance requirement of £10 million. This will reduce to as low as £6.5 million due to the unprecedented COVID pressures this year and our strategy for dealing with COVID into the future. We will be paying for protecting services, communities and families for years to come. Our change reserve of £4.5 million supports efficiency projects across the council. £2 million will be spent on up-and-coming projects to create further savings for budgets of the future. The authority delivers a vast range of services and has a complex and sometimes volatile budget. If this year has shown us anything, is that we must take responsible decisions in this chamber as to how we use our limited resources to protect services, invest in our communities against the headwinds of a global pandemic, rising inflation and government cuts. I commend this budget to Council and reserve the right to speak, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rankin. I believe Councillor Johnson will be seconding the proposal.
Thank you, Chair. Second and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Now invite members to ask questions on the Cabinet's proposals. Members are reminded that they have already had the opportunity to raise questions of technical nature with officers in advance of the meeting, and can I therefore remind you that questions should be related to the matter of principle and repetitious questions should be avoided. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. Yet again, this budget increases council tax. Can the Cabinet member tell us if it is the intention of this Labour administration to continue putting council tax up every year to the maximum amount permitted without having to hold a referendum?
So, your administration in Northumberland is currently putting council tax up by 4.2%. We are doing 2.99%. Everyone sees the medium-term financial plan. You see that the reserves that can be used for offsetting council tax are going to be actually under the lowest amount that is permissible under our reserves and balances policy. We enter a period and a phase where we will have to replenish that reserves, which means actually taking cash directly out of services to build those reserves back up. I'm not really sure what your question is, Councillor Wallace, because we look at the budget every single year from the point of view of the resources that we have and the reserves that we have to carry. So at this point in time, council tax goes up this year. I'm never going to bind anyone who will sit in this position with future council tax rises. But as I said, if we got the average core spending power for an English council, we'd have another £17 million this year, and I wouldn't be putting up council tax. Why don't you ask your government to pay us properly?
Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Does the Mayor and Cabinet believe that members' allowances are insufficient to cover councillors' day-to-day business?
Do believe they're insufficient. So members' allowances, if you remember, about 3 months ago we had the remuneration report come through, and you and the rest of your party unanimously in the chamber voted yourself a 2% pay rise. You did? Oh yes, you did. You voted yourself a 2% pay rise on members' allowances, Councillor Bones. So
sorry, Councillor, that wasn't the question.
So what? Sorry, what's the question then?
Do you think they are insufficient for councillors to go about their day-to-day business?
I follow what the independent remuneration panel says, and I vote for it accordingly. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. Can the Cabinet member tell us what the Council's core spending power is, please?
That's a technical question, Councillor Wallace. It should have been picked up in the budget study review.
Chairman, the Cabinet member referred to the Council's core spending power in his introductory remarks. I don't think that's a technical issue at all. He has raised it. I'm simply asking, can he tell us what it is?
It's around about 1,866 per head, and the average for England is around about 2,117, give or take a few pounds.
So, Chairman, so what is the Council's core spending power?
Core spending calculation is based on per head, and that is a technical question, Councillor Wallace.
It's astonishing, is it not, Chairman?
Councillor Wallace, it clearly states, and I clearly said before, that it's a technical question. You had an opportunity to ask technical questions of officers. You could have asked that earlier on. Anybody else? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Do the Mayor and the Cabinet think £48,000 is good use of taxpayers' money for 20 large plasticine men?
So what you got wrong about that was that money, it hasn't cost the residents of North Tyneside a penny. It was fully grant funded from north of Tyne. Now, in that situation, and it's the same with Rake Lane roundabout, and the fact that that's been fully funded by your government, so the response that comes back is always, but it's still North Tyneside taxpayers' money. And you know what, I'll give you that, it still is, but at the same time, so is the 4.5 billion that you wrote off in dodgy CBILS loans and fake furlough claims, and the 8.5 billion in PPE that you've had to write off, that's also North Tyneside taxpayers' money.
Chair, can
May
I
I
add
come
to
back
that
on
answer
that?
as well, please, Chair? Can I add to that answer as well?
Yeah, you can, Councillor.
I suggest also you may write to Glenn Sanderson and Richard Wearmouth, the Conservative members of the North of Tyne, who unanimously voted that through the Cabinet at North of Tyne. It's part of a wider culture programme for the North of Tyne Combined Authority that sees events in every part of the North of Tyne, signed off by your government with the Culture and Creative Fund. So I suggest you write to Conservative members in North of Tyne, that's why they signed it off as well, Chair.
Well, I accept that North of the Tyne Mayor was responsible for this, and the money may well have come from them. But would it not seem better, since you obviously have an influence there, to focus perhaps like Tees Valley Deputy Mayor, who actually focus on jobs rather than these sort of fripperies?
Councillor Johnson, do you want to answer that?
It's questioning my role at North Tyne, which I'm not here to answer for tonight, but I will certainly answer that. Thank you, Chair. North of Tyne Combined Authority so far is on track to create 7,000 jobs in this area. You know, because at North of Tyne, we're not pathetic like in this chamber, Chair. We work together with our Conservative colleagues and make sure we're the betterment for our region. This funding is in the Culture and Creative Fund at North of Tyne. It is ring-fenced for culture and creative purposes. It comes direct to North Tyneside Council for cultural purposes. We could not spend on anything. I know on your leaflet you decide that we're going to spend ring-fence grant money on other things. The reality is that money is ring-fence and grant-funded. What it's also done is brought 30,000 people to North Tyneside. Karen Goldfitch, the chair of our business forum, the Chronicle Day, said that businesses are much welcome of the Morph Trail because it's brought people that wouldn't normally come to North Tyneside, putting in business and putting money in pockets of people in this borough. So while your pathetic attacks from that side of the chamber on this may come, the reality is businesses in North Tyneside really like this, and it's actually funded by a Conservative administration at North of Tyne as well as Labour people there, Chair.
Councillor Wallace, sorry, Councillor Rankin.
Thank you. If you want to put direct comparisons with the Tees Valley Mayor, he bought a loss-making airport, which has lost under £70 million so far. You actually want to sell the shares in a profit-making airport that's given us £5 million in dividends in the last 5 years when we get your budget objection.
Councillor Westwater.
Why does the Mayor believe that St Mary's Lighthouse and the Northern Prom should be completed to a lesser standard than the rest of Whitley Bay? Does she think the voters of St Mary's Ward are less important than the voters of Whitley Bay?
No.
Councillor Bartoli.
Thank you, Chair. After our last council meeting, in fact just 5 days after, myself and the Mayor were proud to be planting a tree in Tynemouth Park to mark 80 years of the Association of Jewish Refugees. Sadly, this important but solemn event was attended by no members of our Jewish community, and there were none of our residents present to witness it. The Mayor's announcements just a few days earlier would have been an ideal opportunity to highlight this important event, but instead she chose to use her opportunity to speak to the entire borough to address what is clearly the number one issue facing us for the budget today.
Chair, sorry, point of order. Is this actually anything to do with
This
the
isn't
budget?
about the budget.
It is, I'm getting there, Chair.
Well, make your point.
I will do. The number one priority for the Mayor's announcement was not the cost of living crisis, the COVID rates or the upcoming budget, but her insistence that she very rarely used the chauffeur-driven Civic car provided to her, and her assertion that she drove herself everywhere in her little red Fiesta. This is not the first time that the Mayor has used this privileged opportunity to explain to North Tyneside her driving habits and to speak on this matter. I'd just like to point out that it's our duty, and more especially as opposition councillors, to highlight waste and excess when dealing with our residents' money. And whether or not the Mayor and Cabinet will join us today and vote for a budget which saves money for residents by removing this outdated, lavish, taxpayer-funded service reserved for the Mayor and her Cabinet.
That wasn't a question, it was a speech.
I can repeat the question.
No, I don't want you to repeat the question. I think everybody heard.
So
will the Mayor and Cabinet join us today?
His question relates to his own budget objection, so we'll cover that off when we get to your budget objection, Councillor Bartoli.
So you're not going to answer the question?
We'll cover it off when I get to your budget objection.
Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Hartley. Can we keep it down, please?
In 2021, the average Conservative councillor did 4 times as many members' enquiries as the average Labour councillor without the need to claim a penny in expenses, while Labour claimed almost £85,000. Does the Mayor or Cabinet believe Labour councillors offer good value for money?
Yes.
Do I have any more questions? I'm going to move on now. I'm going to move on to the Conservatives' objection. You have up to 10 minutes. Do we have a proposer for the objection? Councillor Westwater.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to present the alternative budget on behalf of the Conservative Group. By rights, Councillor Brookbank should have presented the proposals, but it's actually self-isolating because he has COVID. The recovery budget in front of members this evening is in stark contrast to the budget presented by the Labour Mayor and Cabinet. Again, they have avoided the major issues, continuing their frivolous spending and blaming the government for the inevitable council tax hike. As usual, they spin propaganda that the council was underfunded rather than address their own historical incompetencies. The Labour Mayor and Cabinet have again chosen to hike council tax by the legal maximum. This Conservative budget proposal provides a council tax rebate of at least £150 for every household across North Tyneside. This will help all residents recover from Labour's willful refusal to freeze council tax in recent years. This budget also includes a discretionary hardship fund of £550,000 to offer additional support with rising energy costs for those on the lowest incomes. Our budget also asks the Mayor and our Cabinet to remove the rent increase from the HRA tenants for 22-23 and look forward to efficiencies for 22-23 and beyond that sustained this reduction for tenants. At a time when incomes are squeezed, the Labour Mayor and Cabinet are choosing to spend taxpayers' money on the ludicrous follies, whether it be £48,000 on giant plasticine men, the chauffeur-driven car used by the Mayor and our Cabinet. The Labour administration have refused to think more innovatively, but think more of themselves, and it's clearly shown by the £85,000 set aside for council's expenses, the 1.5 million Dutch-style roundabout on Rake Lane, or the continued publication of the council magazine, which the Mayor had previously promised to scrap. The Conservatives' budget will help North Tyneside recover from this reckless spending. The Conservative budget brings spending back to basics, most importantly fixing our roads and pavements, cleaning our local environment and dealing with the backlog of tree issues caused by the recent storms. These measures will aid a recovery from almost a decade of Labour neglect. There should be accountability and responsibility. For far too long there has been a waste and the priorities of residents have not been listened to. There has been a marked increase in fly tipping. Therefore, the Conservative budget will remove charges at the recycling centres in North Tyneside to help reduce fly tipping across the borough. We have all seen an increase in the recent months, not only causing public health issues, but also making our communities look untidy. Only the Conservatives have a plan to stop this. In this borough, we have a strong sense of community identity. Our budget will provide a community warden for each ward in North Tyneside. This would be a 7-day service where wardens will be able to respond rapidly to issues such as graffiti, litter, antisocial behaviour and dog fouling to help our communities recover from Labour's decade of neglect. The youth of this borough is our future. This is why our budget also tackles the skills problems facing North Tyneside. We would introduce a member of staff to oversee the apprenticeship levy transfer between businesses in North Tyneside, meaning more funding for apprenticeships in the borough and a more skilled workforce fit for the future. Our local bus services on North Tyneside are facing cuts, potentially leaving many residents isolated. The Conservative budget sets aside £80,000 to support our public transport, ensuring services are able to recover from COVID and provide essential connectivity across the borough. Our wonderful and treasured coastline is the best in the UK, and recently announced plans from Labour make some parts below the high standards our residents expect. The Conservative budget includes funding to extend the surface of the Northern Prom in the same style as the work already completed. There is also a provision to repaint the jewel in North Tyneside Coast Crown, St Mary's Lighthouse, undoing years of neglect under Labour administration, which has resulted in the paintwork being discoloured. The main issues that residents have complained about is the state of our roads and pavements. Under the Labour administration, we have seen them worsen, with narrowing stories of pensioners falling over and breaking hips and bones, or even worse. Council data shows that only 3% of our footpaths are considered to be good. The Conservative budget is a budget for recovery for our roads and pavements, more than tripling our amount of investment in fixing our roads and pavements with over a £4.5 million cash injection. This Conservative budget is balanced. It does not use any of the millions of pounds in reserves held by the Council, and contains realistic action to tackle the cost of living. The support of the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has meant Conservatives in government are working to tackle the rising cost of living in North Tyneside, and this budget continues that hard work. Our budget would see our roads and pavements fixed, our local areas maintained by a 7-day service of community wardens, our tree backlog slashed, and an end to fly tipping across this borough. It sets a plan for recovery from Labour's neglect for years. This is a budget to tackle a cost of living crisis and help North Tyneside recover. And we hope that all members will choose to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwater. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to formally second this objection.
You have 5 minutes.
The recovery budget presented by the Conservatives this evening set out our plan to make sure North Tyneside recovers not only from the last 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also from the last decade of neglect from North Tyneside Labour. The differences between us and the party opposite in this budget today couldn't be starker. As Labour proposed the maximum council tax increase each year, we're proposing a council tax rebate of at least £150 for every household, not just a real terms council tax freeze, but a reduction. And with the help of Chancellor Rishi Sunak, we're able to put forward a real package of support for residents to cope with the rising cost of living, instead of more passing the buck. Our budget contains a hardship fund targeted to helping those who've hit the hardest by this crisis, like council tenants who are soon to see their rents increase under Labour. That's why we're proposing a freeze to council rents. This budget also addresses the unequal levels of opportunities across our borough. Our apprenticeship levy transfer scheme would create more training opportunities for our young people, increasing apprenticeship funding and making sure our workforce has the skills for the future. The party opposite often talk about social mobility. This is social mobility in action. I'm aware that the party opposite have dwelled on the potential service cuts to bus services in the borough, and I commend them for their apparent concern, but I'm surprised to see that there's been no allocation in their budget to protect these services. Good public transport is key to the levelling up agenda, and I'm pleased that the Conservatives on this side are on the side of commuters, with our budget setting aside money to save these bus services. This is clearly another example of Labour's big talk and little action that our residents are starting to see straight through. It's not just the controversial chauffeur-driven car that may or may not sometimes be used by the Mayor, or the £48,000 spent on morphs along the seafront, or the £1.5 million spent on the hugely unpopular style roundabout at Rake Lane. The list is endless. But this is taxpayers' money, not the council's, to waste on follies. That's what this alternative budget fixes. It brings the council's spend back to basics. A huge boost to spending on pavements and potholes, more than triple the Labour spend. Increasing the capacity of the tree team and a community warden in each ward. Let's start taking pride in the areas of our borough that Labour have forgotten. This budget demonstrates what can be achieved with wise spending choices based on residents' priorities, without touching a penny of reserves. I ask you all to imagine the difference we could make for residents across North Tyneside if we were to spend just a fraction of the millions of reserves too. This is a budget for recovery and I'm proud to support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bones. I'll now invite members to ask questions to the objection. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. Can one of the councillors who's presented this objection show me within the report where you are doing something different to the 2.99% council tax increase, please?
Thank you, Chair. Our budget will mean a real terms council tax reduction for residents.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask that. What I said was, can you show me in your objection where you are doing something different to what is proposed in our base budget on the 2.99% council tax? The rebate's completely separate, and it only goes to a certain number of people anyway. So can you show me where that is in here?
Under our budget, Chair, the rebate would apply to all households, and that's, in effect, a council tax reduction.
Does your budget include 2.9%?
The rebate is only going to households in E to H. That's the difference.
Chair, under our budget, the rebate would apply to all households in North Tyneside.
Does your budget include a 2.99% council tax increase?
I've already answered that, Chair.
No, you haven't. So it does include a 2.99% council tax increase.
Our budget includes a council tax reduction for all residents.
Councillor Johnson.
Doesn't understand.
That question certainly hasn't been answered, Chair, so I will ask it again. The council tax base in your budget is exactly the same as the council tax base in our budget.
Councillor Johnson, I do believe the Chair said no repetition of questions.
Chair, I haven't finished my question, Chair.
Can you let him finish his question, and then you have the right
Chair,
reply?
you said no repetition of questions.
You haven't answered the question.
I have answered the question,
You haven't answered the question.
I don't know how he knows it's repetition, Chair.
You spoke over the top of him.
He hasn't finished answering.
Your council tax base is the same as the council tax base in our budget. Does that base include a 2.99% rise or not?
Our council tax base is the same as your council tax base, but our council tax rebate means that each resident will have a real terms reduction in their council tax this year.
I've got some terrible news for Councillor Bones, Chair. Do you understand that the council tax rebate isn't actually a council tax rebate and won't change their rebate at all? Their council tax at all? What the council tax rebate is £150 that residents will get. They may well choose it to put on their council tax, they may well not, because there's a cost of living crisis in this country, they may well choose to heat their homes or feed their families. Do you understand, Chair, that the rebate is not indeed a rebate, but is indeed a £150 payment?
Councillor Johnson, we're meant to be asking questions, we've got a debate after this.
Do you understand, do you understand, Chair?
Councillor Rankin, did you indicate you wanted to speak again?
I have another question, Chair.
Councillor Johnson, carry on.
Can one of the Conservative movers confirm that there is no growth area in your budget for a £550,000 support fund? Can you confirm it's the exact same fund that's in Labour's budget that we put in?
The hardship fund is set out in the papers, Chair.
Councillor Rankin.
For clarification, the hardship fund's actually in the Mayor's amendment letter. So it's actually in the base budget.
Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Johnson.
I know Councillor Bones is a new member, so he may not understand the budget, Chair, but does he understand also that in the Mayor's budget there is £750,000 going to a levy to the Joint Transport Committee which funds buses directly?
Yes, Chair, I do understand that, but our budget sets aside additional funds to protect the bus services that the Labour Party opposite have been making a campaign point of in the past 2 weeks.
Come and state the questions, Councillor Johnson.
Does Councillor Bones know how much funding his funding will pay for in terms of buses?
Yes.
Can you tell me, please?
No.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Sandra.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask one of the movers how
they think we will double the resourcing of the arborist team, which is currently 6, with a sum of £30,000 in the growth budget?
Thank you, Chair. The Head of Finance has indicated that this is a typo within the budget submission.
So how much is it, or how many do you expect to double the resourcing with?
So it's not, the typo is the doubling. And that was made clear by the Head of Finance at the beginning of the meeting.
Councillor Rankin, would you indicate to speak again? Sorry. Would anybody else like to ask any questions? I now invite members to speak the objections in debate. Councillor Carl Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. The Conservative objection is not grounded in the reality of the financial situation the Council finds itself in. After over a decade and £127 million of Tory cuts and a borough facing a Tory cost of living crisis. It is perhaps not surprising considering the Conservatives' recent attempts at budgets. Since 2016, the Conservative governments have forced local councils to put up council tax year on year, passing the burden of paying for vital local services from the Tory government to local people and businesses. If we had adopted the Conservative budget since 2016-17, the Council would be facing a £12 million black hole in its budget, as well as a deficit in the strategic reserve. Under the Tories, we would have faced a 12% council tax rise or more Tory cuts to our services. This year is no better for the Tories. While the Labour budget would protect those households most in need by taking them out of council tax with an additional £150 to those in receipt of local council tax support, reducing their council tax burden to zero for over 16,000 residents. Many of these residents still continue to struggle, with hundreds of them having been successful in applying to the Household Support Fund in year. So those 16,000 residents most struggling are what we will support, Chair. However, the Tories are choosing instead to give their money to council tax in bands E to H. This is literally taking funds targeted at the poorest people in our borough and giving it to people living in the most expensive properties in our borough. I find it incredibly difficult to believe that anyone would propose the removal of support targeting our most vulnerable people, particularly in the context of a Tory cost of living crisis. Whilst we know the COVID pandemic is an impact on everyone across the borough, we also know that it didn't impact everyone on the same footing. It impacted hardest on those already struggling, exacerbating the existing inequalities on an unprecedented scale. The Bank of England recently said the next year will see the biggest regression in our standard of living since records began. Research from a range of leading organisations and charities working to tackle poverty and inequalities highlights the increasing number of people, families and children being pushed into crisis and absolute poverty, increasing reliance on food banks. With the Tory lost cost of living crisis raging, if we are to accept this objection, it would likely see our council tax collection rate plummet as people chose between heating their homes or paying council tax. The Tory proposal to remove £1.5 million from the local council tax support scheme for our most vulnerable people demonstrates to me and everyone else just how far removed from reality the Conservative councils in North Tyneside are and the Tory party nationally. You claim to want to put more on roads and pavements, but at a meeting last year you failed to support a motion which guaranteed an additional £2 million for roads and pavements per year until the end of this mayoral term and refused to ask your own government to reverse their savage cuts to local roads and pavements budgets. We have guaranteed extra money for roads and pavements and would love to do more. However, the Tory proposal, which would see us sell off half our share in the airport for £3.9 million, despite the fact the airport has returned more than this in dividends in the last 5 years, and over £16 million total. The £16 million return in dividends is more than the current value of shares. You are selling off the family silverware at the worst possible time. I've heard Councillor Wallace in this chamber a number of times attack Gordon Brown for selling off the gold. The Conservatives in North Tyneside want to sell off our family silverware at the worst possible time. This is the same short-sighted financial nonsense that led Tory Northamptonshire Council to bankruptcy. The short-sighted financial incompetence continues with the use of a capital receipt for the sale of land at Sandy Lane to balance the Tory books. Labour are using this money to bring forward Indigo Park development, investing money to bring this land for development standard, which will lead to hundreds of jobs on our site in the northwest of the borough. Not to mention, funding a capital plan on the back of a capital receipt is very risky. You cannot spend the money until you have it. There is a real risk of not seeing this money this financial year and leaving the capital plan for £5.4 million black hole way beyond the £2 million in contingencies in the capital plan. The Tory budget is designed knowing they will never have to implement it, full of short-sighted, poorly thought out financial incompetence aimed at producing headlines to social media and newsletter. However, the only headlines coming out of this should be: the Tories want to take from the poorest, most in need residents and give it to those with the most expensive households in the borough, selling shares of an airport for 3.9 million when the airport has returned about 16 million to the council. On that basis, nobody should be voting for the suggestion, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking in support of the recovery budget, which is set to help our businesses and residents in North Tyneside. Our residents are facing economic struggle in the coming years, and we as a council need to be sure that money is spent by this council is spent prudently and for the benefit of all residents. It is imperative that our roads and pavements continue to be maintained. It is essential that our streets are kept clean and fly tipping is eradicated by removing recycling charges. The backlog of the tree management is dealt with following the recent storms and the storms to come. Our residents do not want to see their hard-earned money being spent on fanciful projects like the Dutch-style roundabout at the top of Rate Lane. Council's expenses should be scrapped and the council magazine also scrapped, as promised by the Mayor, in order to use taxpayers' money on a more essential issues. We'd make a rebate of council tax of approximately £150 per household in North Tyneside to help the residents recover from Labour's refusal to freeze the council tax. Councils with similar numbers of staff spend considerably less on the trade union facility time. We propose to reduce the trade union facility time by 50%, which equates to a saving of £120,000 of taxpayers' money. For this, I fully support the Conservatives' notice of objection to the 2022-2026 financial planning and budget process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Councillor Steve Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I feel I need to explain to new members of the Council or those who do not fully understand how the HRA budget works. The HRA is a ring-fenced budget with the exception of some special grants or bids the Council has won. All the money in the HRA that comes in is spent on the tenants by their rents paid. It cannot be spent on anything else. So before members make any decisions, I think they need to be aware of the impact it will have on the funding for the HRA and therefore the impact on services to our tenants and the wider North Tyneside community. Firstly, importantly to point out is the rent increase is based on a government policy statement of using CPI for September plus 1% to set the rents and is used by all authorities across the country, including Northumberland and Gateshead, who have already set theirs. The total impact of a zero rent increase for 2022-23 would be to remove £105 million from the 30-year business plan, and the HRA would go into deficit for 22-23, which is a statutorily we cannot do. In order to prevent that, we would need to identify a package of savings of £2.7 million per annum to rebalance the plan. That is assuming that inflation reduces down to the long-term government target of CPI of 2%, which, given the current level and direction of inflation, which rose again yesterday to 5.5%, is unlikely. Also, members should be aware that inflation is predicted to rise to 7% by the end of the year. This would push the budget further into deficit and require more cuts. I would point out that the current approval plan that we have approved forecasts £218 million of new genuinely affordable council house building over the period of the 30-year plan. This would reduce to £113 million, assuming nothing else changed. Members should note that due to increasing rate of inflation, this rent increase is already considerably below where inflation is, so this rise is already less than a standstill budget. On an individual basis, 65% of our tenants are on welfare benefits of either housing benefit or universal credit, so this increase will be wholly or partially covered for the majority. We also support our tenants to apply for discretionary housing payments, and staff can provide support and advice to those in difficulty. Chair, the HRA plays a big part locally, spending about £8.5 million in supporting businesses and employment. We utilise 127 contractors and suppliers across North Tyneside, supporting individual businesses and jobs. In conclusion, Chair, the HRA budget is a 30-year plan which is carefully planned to ensure we support our current tenants and build and provide the housing and services they and future tenants will need. It supports jobs and local businesses. It makes sure we use it to tackle climate change. Having a line into a budget paper without full implications being considered is not the way things should be decided, and it appears to be simply for election purposes and does not even follow government guidance, and it puts at risk apprenticeships, affordable homes and tackling climate change. Thank you, Chair.
Point of order, Chair. Councillor Cox is discussing the HRA freeze, but that is not a budget decision. The reason that that is not costed within the budget papers is because that is a cabinet decision, not a budget decision.
It's included, Chair. It's included in the budget papers that have put forward, which will be voted on, not individual lines of the budget. It's included in the overall document.
A request to the cabinet is included in the document.
Councillor Bones, I've just had clarification from the Eagle that what Councillor Cox has been saying is correct. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. The Labour budget administers the government's scheme this year with regards to passing money back using the council tax system, so the council tax rebate, but using the council tax system as part of the energy crisis. You've said on a number of occasions your budget provides £150 for every single household, and it doesn't, because it's our budget does that. What you've done is you've taken money away from the poorest in the borough, and you've allocated it out to bands E to H. And that's absolutely clear from the papers you've got there. You talk about the cost of living crisis, but you voted to increase VAT when we asked you join with us so we could write to the government to take VAT away. You voted for that. And if you live in a band E house or band F house, then the amount of money that you would tend to earn to afford that mortgage, you voted to take £1,000 off these people. You also voted to take £20 off universal credit recipients, which was £1,000 off the poorer people in the borough. That's literally what you hold your hands up for, to take money off people. So I find it really quite staggering that you're concerned about the cost of living crisis when it's made in Westminster and you support your government in delivering it. Your budget objection supports the council tax increase. You can't get away from that. All you need to do is look at the band cost for band D within our report and look at your own, and it's exactly the same. So you're playing a sleight of hand with the electorate by saying that you're providing a council tax rebate. You're not. You are supporting a 2.99% council tax increase this year. And the thing I find most shocking is you then still start talking about the millions of pounds worth of reserves. And the reason that you have to put council tax up this year is because you yourselves know what is in the medium-term financial plan. You know the reserves that can be used to absorb council tax increases, and you know the ones that can't. And you know that we have to replenish these over the next 3 years. You know all this, but you misrepresent this to the electorate. So much so, someone that I know who moved into Tynemouth Ward 2 weeks ago has had a letter through saying there's £92 million worth of reserves and they're putting your council tax up by 2.99%. You are also doing that within your base budget. You cannot deny it because that is exactly what you're doing. You're punishing those working age council tax support claimants by taking away the additional support that we are putting in place. Whilst I accept that some bandy people in some bandy houses might not have income, they could be retired, they could have lost jobs, etc., so they could be asset rich and they could be cash poor. You're taking it away from people who are asset very poor and cash very poor. I honestly don't know how you can propose that as a serious proposal in your budget. I find it absolutely staggering. I really do. I can't support the wardens because of the way you're funding it, which is by exactly the same way as the council tax wheeze that you're doing, which is you're taking money away from the poorest to do something like that. This budget isn't a serious budget. It is literally for Facebook and it is literally for leaflets. The most staggering one, though, is that having tried to push us to put more money into roads and pavements when we guaranteed another £8 million just last year and you didn't support it. And every time you get a sniff of reserves, you then say, I want to spend on roads and pavements, and I challenge you to put it into your base budget for this year. I challenge you to put it in. And what's happened is you put it in, and then when you've gone to look at it, you've actually found out that the reserves on then you couldn't. So what you've done is you've decided to sell the airport, an asset which has put £16 million in this borough in the last few years, £5 million in the last 5 years. Pure cash. It's not income like gyms and stuff where you've got to offset it against overheads. It is pure cash that comes in that we use to protect services, invest in our communities, and you want to sell it. I find it absolutely incredible. The other thing you're doing is, by the way, you obviously didn't ask about the land receipt, because that bit of land that we actually took out at Cabinet a little while ago made it surplus requirements. That money's going to create 200 jobs. But you didn't ask that when you just put this in. And as I say, it's all based around a leaflet which says...
1 minute, Councillor Rankin.
Yeah, I'm winding up, Chair. Labour voted against increased funding for roads and pavements. But when you look at what's behind it, it's a complete and utter charade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Councillor Hartley.
Yes, Chairman, I support the Conservative Group budget. I consider the recovery budget to be balanced. It's effective and efficient and will ensure these, the most vulnerable of our society will be protected. With the growing population of older people in North Tyneside, this council has to ensure that we keep pace with services that they require. If the current trend continues and funding fails to keep up with demands of an ageing population, we will face some difficulties, choices about the services that we do provide. This is why we have set a budget which will make a rebate council tax of £150 per household in North Tyneside to help residents recover from Labour's refusal to freeze the council tax. I agree if all councillors' expenses should be scalped and that the council magazine should be scrapped in order to use council tax money on more essential issues. The money could be allocated to Nexus for the local bus services, which the elderly can use and will look forward to, and for those who I have worked with for years in the NHS, they hope to get a bus to work and hope to get it back. The Conservative Group will invest £600,000 in the Community Warden Scheme for each ward to deal with issues such as antisocial behaviour. During our recent storm, and as we all know up to date, we have a backlog of a number of trees which remain down and split. And I would say, yes, I'll be happy to see increasing the arborist team will be welcomed by all residents as councillors. I fully support the Conservative notice of motion to the 2022-25 financial planning and budget process. But I am extremely disappointed to hear some of the comments from various people. And a lot of people have short memories. Well, you know, bankruptcy, I think it would be good for all members to look at 2001, 2002 papers which tell how this council, run by Labour, went into bankruptcy, and it took us a long time to get out of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bartoli.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just respond, first of all, to a couple of points made by Councillor Rankin. I think he said that we didn't vote for the VAT or the proposed VAT cut on fuel duty. I think you'll find that we did vote with their motion on that. I think it's also fair that he says that we didn't vote for a £2 million spend on potholes. And he's right to say that because we'd actually asked for more money to be spent, which is why we voted against theirs. And the final thing I would say, just in response to his comments about this £93 million or £92 million in reserve, which he said at the beginning of his speech today, we do generally hold £92 million in reserve. I think it's a little bit rich to think that the residents of this borough are fools and that they can't see that when we say that there are reserves, I think they more than understand what the different types of reserves are for. And I think they're more than clever enough to make their own decisions. And I would say if he thinks we are lying or trying to deceive our residents, and he's more than welcome to take us to standards. With regards to the budget itself, I'm proud to be supporting this Conservative recovery budget, not only because it's good for the residents of North Tyneside, but because it's ambitious and it's imaginative. I'm particularly proud to support the extra £4.5 million to be spent on improving our roads and pavements. At our meeting in November, Councillor Johnson, and I quote, admitted that our roads and pavements have fallen behind since 2010. And I'm certain that all of our inboxes are regularly filled with complaints about this issue. Indeed, Capita's report, which was mentioned earlier and was circulated to us, recently stated that only 3% of North Tyneside's pavements were classed as good. North Tyneside's own most recent residents survey, published on our own website, puts roads and pavements as the #1 area that needs improvement across the borough. And it's actually 15% ahead of the next nearest issue for residents, which is antisocial behaviour. The real effect of our budget tonight is that for every pothole that would have been repaired, we would repair 3. And for every cracked paving stone that would be replaced, likewise, we would replace 3. Now, councils across the country are all facing similar issues, but not all councils bury their head in the sand or blame the government for their own failings. Southampton Council is a good example. This has 25 Conservative and 23 Labour councillors, and were, like us, recently heavily criticised for the condition of their roads and their pavements. They faced this issue head-on and provided the additional funding needed, and amongst other measures, they invested in a fleet of dedicated vehicles and crews to rapidly respond to footpath, carriageway and curbing defects, in much the same way as our graffiti and fly tipping teams do now. So perhaps it's time that the Labour leadership started listening to what our residents are actually telling us that they want done and putting their priorities first. They certainly don't want a £1.5 million Dutch-style death trap roundabout. They certainly don't want £85,000 in Labour councillors' expenses. They certainly don't want a chauffeur-driven car, and they certainly don't want £48,000 on children's figures. They want their money spent on the priorities, and this budget does exactly that. For this reason, I will be supporting the Conservative recovery budget.
Point of order, Chair. Can I move that a question now be put as being sufficient debate in this chamber? Can I suggest we move to the vote, Chair?
Councillor Wallace is the last one, and then we'll call it. We'll go to debate. Do I have a seconder? Could we now go to the name vote, please? I think there's been sufficient debate.
Chair,
That's an outrageous denial of debate, Chairman. I think that's
Chair,
very
this is one of the
regrettable.
biggest decisions made by the Council, and I think it should be fully scrutinised, and every member should have the option to speak.
I think there's been sufficient debate on this.
Chairman, if a motion on ending this debate early is going to be voted on, it has to be discussed.
It's indicative of the fact that Labour don't wish to discuss seriously any alternative proposals, Chairman. That's very regrettable.
Chair, I didn't know Councillor Wallace was going to speak before I moved the motion, but I did move the motion. I will withdraw the motion. We'll let Councillor Wallace speak.
That's fine. I'll let Councillor Wallace speak. You withdraw the motion.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm much obliged. I'm pleased to support this Conservative budget, which provides measures to improve daily life of all residents in North Tyneside, whether by a cash rebate of £150 to all households, a huge programme of road and pavement repairs, better seafront regeneration, or support for bus services and apprenticeships. It's a great programme to improve our borough as the pandemic ends. In particular, I'd like to focus on the provision of community wardens for all wards, giving a 7 days a week service to deal with graffiti, litter, dog fouling, antisocial behaviour and the like. We all know that it's often these relatively minor issues which, individually or cumulatively, really spoil everyday life for many of our residents. The Council often fails to care for and properly maintain its assets, bought with public money. I was told just this week, for example, that there are no cyclical maintenance plans in place for railings or bollards, an astonishing failure to maintain our assets. During the pandemic, as we have all spent much more time locally, the standard of maintenance in our immediate area has become increasingly important to residents. and these community wardens will be there to assist with getting that better maintenance and getting repairs done more speedily. People are paying big sums in council tax, sums which Labour have increased year on year, and residents deserve a better service for their money. Community wardens will help to provide that. Allied to that is the Conservative proposal increasing the resources of the arborist team. Trees are an important part of every area, but they need to be properly maintained. And even before recent storms, residents were often disappointed at the lack of response to their concerns. We now seem to have a huge backlog of work, with officers unable to indicate when trees will be inspected. Extra staff is clearly a priority, and I hope all councillors will support this. If not, residents will be astonished at the failure. Also important is our plan to remove all charges for recycling activities. Such charges often encourage fly tipping, and that's been a real problem because the charges deter residents from properly disposing of waste. A reference was made by the Cabinet member to the core spending of this borough. Yet, astonishingly, he was unable to tell us what it actually was. The Deputy Mayor referred to the position
Point
of
of order,
the Council.
Chair, I did tell her what it was. I said it was a technical question. I didn't have to answer it, but I told her exactly what it was.
Well, let me tell the Chamber what the total figure is, which is what I was trying to ascertain and which I've been researching. The total core spending is £180 million. Reference was made to the Deputy Mayor of the financial
Point of order,
position
Chair, the core spending calculation issued by the government is per head.
The figure which officers have provided me with is a total figure, Chairman, which has in previous years often been referred to in council papers. It's £180 million. Reference was made by the Deputy Mayor to the council's financial position in 2016. The core spending power then was £159 million, and thus there's been a substantial increase. All the proposals in the Conservative budget are properly funded. We know that taxpayers' money is often wasted, whether it's 48,000 on morph statues, people are amazed at the cost of them, or printing magazines, for example, or on funding trade union staff when the unions themselves are wealthy. And indeed on this council spends far more than other comparable authorities. Our budget, however, makes far, far better use of the cash available, and I hope all councillors will support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Does anybody else feel they need to speak or think they've had sufficient debate or not? Can I ask Councillor Mankin to exercise his right to reply? Can we move to the vote? Indian vote, Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a named vote on the Conservative Group's objection. Councillor Linda Arkley. Councillor Ken Barry. Councillor Lewis Bartoli.
For.
Councillor Gary Bell.
Against.
Councillor Linda Bell.
Yes.
Councillor Liam Bones. Councillor Trish Brady.
Against.
Councillor Brian Burtis.
Against.
Councillor Carol Burtis. Councillor Joanne Cassidy. Councillor Debbie Cox. Councillor Stephen Cox. Councillor Naomi Craven. Councillor Eddie Dark. Councillor Linda Dark. Councillor Kath Davis.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Day. Councillor David Drummond.
Against.
Councillor Peter Early.
Against.
Councillor Sandra Graham. Councillor Muriel Green.
Against.
Councillor Margaret Hall. Councillor Tracy Hallway. Councillor Janet Hunter. Councillor John Hunter. Councillor Carl Johnson. Councillor Hannah Johnson. Councillor Christopher Johnston. Councillor Joe Kerwin. Councillor Frank Lott. Councillor Wendy Lott. Councillor Gary Madden. Councillor Anthony McMullen. Councillor Janice Moore. Councillor Jim Montague. Councillor Thomas Mulvenna. Councillor Andy Newman. Councillor Pat Oliver. Councillor John O'Shea. Councillor Norman Percy. Councillor Stephen Phillips. Councillor Bruce Pickard. Councillor Martin Rankin. Norma Redfern, elected Mayor. Councillor Paul Richardson. Councillor Willie Samuel. Councillor Jane Shaw. Councillor Matthew Thurloway. Councillor Joan Walker. Councillor Judith Wallace. Councillor George Westwater. And Councillor Matt Wilson. Thank you, Chair. So there were 7 votes for the objection and 44 votes against the objection. So the objection is defeated.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. The objection is defeated, so I'll now invite members to speak to the substantive motion, i.e. the Cabinet's proposal, for up to 5 minutes. Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Given the situation that we find ourselves in with Storm Arwen, Barra, Corrie, Malak, Duncan and Eunice to come, no one can be under any illusion about the impact of climate change on our borough and our residents. That is why our ambitious climate change declaration of working towards being net carbon zero by 2030, a full 20 years before the government, but following the same principles, is so important for the security of our people and our borough. Our budget proposals help to support a robust climate change plan. Conservative government funding, policy and direction is helping us to bid for funding from the Transforming Cities Fund, the Active Travel Fund, such as the Rake Lane Roundabout that you so consciously are declaring that you're against. This is ring-fenced funding that can be used for nothing else, like the 48,000 from North of Tyne for the Morph Trail. All these pots of money help to make our pavements and roads fit for walking and cycling, to enable people to have a modal shift in travel choices for those that can. This also helps with the public health agenda and levelling inequalities, whilst at the same time reducing carbon emissions. The lack of government funding to support our bus services is a real blow to deliver climate change. We hope the government will change their minds at the very last minute and support our communities, many of whom will have no bus service at all after 6 p.m. at night. There is huge regional disparity in public travel funding. London, through TfL, enjoys the receipt of £877 per head, as against £314 per head in the North East. How unfair and unjust is that in an area with other significant determinants of deprivation? We could, given a proper levelling up and Transport for the North delivery plans, have had a fully integrated transport system helping everyone and our planet. Every aspect of council service and delivery now embraces climate change, and the work is at pace to help both behavioural change, engage with residents, businesses and organisations too, and deliver a cleaner and a greener borough. Our Great North Forest and other tree planting schemes, changing our fleet to fully electric on replacement, less waste to landfill and more reuse of waste through further recycling and anaerobic digestion. This at a time when more household waste is being collected as fuelled by the pandemic. The rolling out of EV charging in its many forms will help residents with reducing fuel and excise duty and costs and emissions. Green Deal schemes will assist in homes to help those who meet the criteria to heat their homes more sustainably. We are moving fast and at pace and across everything we do, whilst taking residents with us, especially our youth council and young people. These high and extra unexpected costs dealing with storms and weather events mean we need that rainy day or reserves money so we can respond quickly and efficiently to climate events that so affect our residents' day-to-day lives. At this stage, I want to pay tribute to our hard-working staff and the many residents who have let us know how much they appreciate our staff working in difficult and dangerous conditions to help them.
1 minute, Councillor Graham.
Thank you. Phil Scott, who heads up this service, is approaching retirement during this very busy time, and sincere thanks to him for his loyalty, his leadership and his team for keeping us all safe, and services that keep on going despite all that is thrown at us. The baton will be carried on by the redoubtable Sam Dand as we move to that next generation of staff. I commend this budget, which is balanced, true and honest, and hope it can be supported by all in the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Graham wants the government to support our bus services. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Councillor Graham has just voted against extra funding for our bus services here in North Tyneside. When Labour put together their budget initially before Christmas, they had set aside an initial £150 as part of Council Tax Support Scheme. And since then, the Chancellor has gone further, meaning that all residents in bands A to D will now receive that £150 in support. That's in addition to a £550,000 discretionary fund to help with energy costs. And I hope the members opposite are thankful for that, and that there's been no mention of that additional funding from Treasury in their speeches. And final...
Councillor Rankin did mention it.
Well, final point, Chair. It's no wonder that the party opposite are so keen to shut down debate and are piling money into reserves. I would be too if my benches were about to be taken over by Jamie Driscoll's hard left supporters.
Chair, can I just say
Can we keep it down, please?
Sorry, that there was a fundamentally misleading statement. We are not piling money into reserves. The
I'm not warning you again.
The medium-term financial plan demonstrates very clearly the usage of reserves over the next 4 years. That was a deeply misleading statement.
Moving on, would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Early.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting this budget proposal. While the financial outlook remains challenging across my portfolio area, the proposals in this budget will mean that children and young people in North Tyneside will continue to receive an excellent level of help and support in education, in the level of safeguarding we provide through our adoption services, our fostering services, our youth justice service, our SEND provision, our looked after children services, and our employment and adult learning services, which includes 2 dedicated members of staff to work on the promotion of apprenticeships. The extraordinarily high quality of these services continues to be recognised. In addition to the current outstanding Ofsted rating for our children's services, in the last 12 months, our Youth Justice Service has received an outstanding rating following an inspection by HM Inspectorate of Probation. We are one of only 2 local authorities in the country to have outstanding ratings for both these services. Also, in the last month, we've had the report from the Ofsted and Care Quality Commission following the inspection of our SEND services. The inspectors concluded that the outcomes for children with SEND in North Tyneside are strong, and that our leaders in education, health and social care are united in their mission to improve the experience and outcomes of children and young people with SEND. We are one of the few local authorities not to be given a written statement of action following this type of inspection. In addition to the excellent work of our officer team who have contributed to these successes, in part, our ability to do this has been because North Tyneside Council has set balanced budgets over recent years. That has allowed us to provide the funding and resources to continue to deliver these services to such an excellent standard. Whilst all the services we deliver as a council are important, probably none or more so than the services in my portfolio. What could be more important to our residents than knowing that the children and young people of the borough continue to be educated, supported and protected to such a high standard. I support this budget proposal because I believe it will enable the Council to continue to do exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Early. Councillor Gary Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Like company night, really, but we've had a mayor who's been in power for 10 years, 9 years. Been elected 3 times. I think the last 2 times you won your 50%. You didn't have to have a second ballot. So this is the years of neglect from the 9 members opposite, or the 8. I think one hasn't turned up because he's got COVID, so I wish Sean well in his recovery. And 1 independent, so I think about 50 of us, yeah. So what's he doing? Something totally wrong. I'll have to have a word myself when I get home. But as far as I can see from our budget, no libraries are going to close. No leisure centres are going to close. We're going to protect the most vulnerable in our society, which is we do. And as a former council member, I know that every penny we spend on the precept that this is taxpayers' money. We try and squeeze every pip we can out of that pound. And it can be hard at times. You have to make tough decisions when you're in power. And it's great being in the opposition because you can have a different view to things because you're not having to implement that budget. And I think that both George and Liam spoke well in their statements. Obviously, don't agree with it, but I think you both spoke well. And I think that we've got to look at where we are. We're protecting our services. Look around us. All the different councils, whether it's Labour or Conservative, they haven't got the parks and leisure anymore. They haven't got the leisure centres. We have. And we are doing great stuff. You just go down, drive past down here the other day. Sage is here. Indigo Park. We're developing as well. We are a council that believes in that. We're getting jobs in, bringing council tax revenues, business rates in, and then we filter it down to the lowest in our society, and we build up and try and make that qualities, which we all are here for, to try and make the equality gap, to try and bridge it if we can. I know it's hard. But I fully support this budget. I think Martin's done a good job. I know the officers do a good job. The financial officers, it's a difficult time for cabinet members. And I fully support the Mayor, and I fully support our Labour group. And it's when I go out campaigning in the coming weeks, I'll be saying that this budget is a good budget, and residents should support the Labour Party and our ongoing support to our residents and bring this borough, get more accolades, because this borough is very well thought of, and I travel around the country quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Matt Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. The budget before us hasn't been zapped onto our desks from nowhere. It's the result of a painstaking process. I want to thank all those involved for their hard work in presenting us with a balanced budget to approve. Before we do, I want to reflect for a minute on what that phrase balanced budget actually means. Of course, it is an accounting term referring to the sum of all the incomings and outgoings, but it's more than that. This isn't just about the balancing of abstract financial transactions. It's also about the balancing of priorities, because budget setting doesn't happen in a vacuum. Our council, like local businesses and local households, is battling against challenging economic conditions. These challenges are, without doubt, amplified by ill-judged policies made by the current Conservative government, not to mention their waste. A quick tally of faulty PPE orders, dodgy COVID loans and related items I make to round about £16 billion. We could run North Tyneside Council for 100 years based on the waste of 1 year of Tory mismanagement. And had we adopted the budget proposal put forward this time last year by the members across the chamber, this council's balances would already be in the red. Thank goodness then that our Mayor and her cabinet members are on top of their brief. Under Mayor Redfern, North Tyneside has seen a decade of economic growth exceeding all its regional partners. Even despite the multitude of financial demands facing the council, the constant juggling act brought about by limited resources, I believe this budget has got the balance right. I'm not sure any council anywhere has ever presented a perfect budget, certainly never a budget that pleases everyone. However, a sound plan is before us, It's alert to both short-term and long-term pressures. It's the result of caring, committed people doing their jobs well. It's a budget that is well balanced, both in financial terms and also in policy terms. And for those reasons, it has my support.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Carl Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I first want to start by paying tribute to our former colleague and friend, Ray Glynn. This is the first budget that we've had without Ray, and it's just his hard work over the years that we're in a position to set this budget this year with his prudent financial management in all of Mayor Redfern's terms as Mayor. This is the budget that protects local services that they tell us are their priority. Libraries and leisure centres remain open in the communities right around North Tyneside, 9 years after George Westwater's infamous Rowan reviews that would close them. This budget is set in the context of £127 million of Tory government guts since 2017. Members opposite may not understand buses, but this council and this budget invests over £750,000 right into Nexus's budget to boost bus services right across North Tyneside. In the coming days, we'll hear exactly what that's done to bus service and exactly how it will be this Labour administration and the Labour administrations in Tyne and Wear that are propping up our bus services while the Tories rip out the cuts and the private bus companies put puffers before passengers. Our investment plan is over £112 million to fund the things that residents have told us are priorities: roads and pavements, investments in the libraries and leisure centres, regeneration, Wall's End, North Shields, Whitley Bay, the North West, climate change and investment right around our borough. The budget continues to add £2 million a year into roads and pavements to try and tackle the Tory government's 40% cuts to our roads and pavement budgets. We're protecting those most in need, just as the Tory cost of living crisis is biting. Our budget will extend the local council tax support scheme, taking 16,720 residents out of council tax altogether. The Conservative budget would have plunged 9,380 of the most vulnerable residents in this borough into £150 additional council tax for them to find this year. During the cost of living crisis, when we're seeing fuel rises, energy rises, inflation busting, shopping prices, national insurance rise for working people, student loans are rising for working people, working age families have a universal credit cuts, with working age families having a ridiculous marginal tax rate while the Tories fail to tackle the national issues. The budget and the HRA was Tories would cut 110 million from to continue to ensure that we will build 5,000 affordable homes. We know residents right around this borough want homes to live in, and we will ensure they have them. As Councillor Graham's already said, it's going to help us towards tackling climate change, being carbon neutral by 2030. Councillor earlier referred to our outstead of standing children's services, our outstanding youth justice service, and our strong outcome for SEND services. Our Innovative Poverty Intervention Fund will continue to provide a range of practical support to those most in need, tackling food poverty and food insecurity, the introduction of the bread and butter thing, increasing access to affordable food in the greatest need, delivered by community hubs, will plug the current gap between existing emergency support via food banks and a high-cost mainstream supermarkets. Continue with our support for the school meal vouchers over the holidays. We'll create a new inequalities fund with the CCG and pool funding to support the voluntary sector with new initiatives and inequalities. This budget is also set in the context, as Councillor Rankin said, of a north-south divide. If we had the same level of core spending power, which is the average for England, we'd have an extra £17 million to spend. It's a common sense budget which invests in residents' priorities. I want to take a look at some of the differences in our budget to what was proposed in the Conservative budget there. The Council magazine. In our recent resident survey, residents told us that their favourite tool for the council communicating with them is our council magazine. As a listening council, do you want us to scrap the magazine that residents tell us is their favourite tool for communicating to? The residents magazine is incredible value for money, and we will certainly be keeping the residents magazine. They want to reduce trade union facility time by 120,000 by 50%. After 10 years and £127 million of Tory cuts, without that trade union facility time, this council would be in a vastly different situation. I want to now look at some of the things that these councillors are voting. If the Conservatives fail to support or abstain on our budget, Councillor Bartoli and Brockbank, Councillor Bartoli and Johnson, Tynemouth Ward, will be voting against the North Shields Transport Hub. They'll be voting against the Lieutenant's Bank being done. They'll be voting against Tyne Brand regeneration. They'll be voting against the Fish Quay. If they fail to support or vote against this budget, those are the things in our capital plan that those will be failing to support. The residents of Tynemouth and North Shields will be very interested in that, Chair.
Point of order, Chair. Just as we were mentioned personally, I think those items were also in our budget. We agreed the same capital plan as yourselves, so we're not reducing any of those
I've got bad news for Councillor Bartoli, but his amendment, his objection was just defeated. We are now on substandard motion. If they fail to vote for or vote against this budget, they are voting against those. So you can tell that the residents of North Shields that you don't want the transport hub, you don't want the town square, you don't want Howard Street. You do not want Nobleman Square, you do not want Tanner's Bank, you do not want the Fish Quay. That's what you will have to explain to the residents of Tyne.
By that logic, Councillor, you just voted against those same items yourself, because they were in our plan as well. I'm just pointing out there.
If you want to speak next, you can speak next, that's fine. But don't talk over people when they're speaking.
It was a point of order.
The differences are stark, Chair, between our budget and the Conservative budget. Ours is common sense and balanced. Theirs is reckless, selling off the family silverware, selling off the airport, making reckless decisions with capital receipts and hurting the poorest in our borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Would anybody else like to speak? Elected Mayor.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't going to speak, Chair, to be quite honest, but I just want to thank our officers and thank our Cabinet members for bringing this fantastic budget. Because what it means is that we continue, as a council, as a Labour government, as a Labour administration, to support those less vulnerable than ourselves and support those with the greatest need, whether they live in Whitley Bay, Wheatslade, Riverside, right across the borough. That's really important to us. I wasn't going to say anything, but a number of times that 10 years of neglect has been mentioned, hasn't it? Well, all of you here can remember. Do you remember Whitley Bay in 2013? Good. Never mind the lighthouse. Do you remember the Spanish City in 2013? Do you know there's 60-odd businesses grown in Whitley Bay since 2013. So I'm delighted that this budget is going to enable us to continue the fantastic work we're doing and building on what we've been doing. And when they talk about the caring Tories, they're going to do all this wonderful thing. I've got a good memory, Mrs. Arkley, Councillor Arkley rather. Between 2004 and 2009, the great Labour administration in North Tyneside brought in free breakfasts, remember? To help those worst and vulnerable in ourselves, brought them in. They're very popular with the Tory government now, by the way. In 2009, Councillor Arkley came in with her administration. What did you do, Councillor Arkley? You scrapped the free breakfast.
Point of order, Chair. This is meant to be about
So
the
all
budget.
I'm going to say to you, as far as I'm concerned, well done for this budget. Well done for this budget. We have got here a budget that we continue to do the great work for the residents of North Tyneside, who we stand up for and listen to. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I remind members, if there's a point of order raised, to give way, we'll take the point of order and then we'll go back for them to answer at the point of order, rather than shouting over the top of each other. And that goes for both sides. Would anybody else like to speak? Does everybody else feel I've had sufficient debate? Councillor Rankin, would you like to exercise the right to reply?
Thank you, Chair. I think if Councillor Walkley mentions 2002, the Mayor's allowed to mention 2009. And from Councillor Bartoli's point of view, using the same methodology you've just challenged Councillor Johnson on, that means you've just voted to do a 2.99% council tax increase when you voted for your amendment. That's what you've just done. I haven't got a lot more to say. My excellent colleagues have said it all. Instead of trying to score cheap shots on core spending, Councillor Wallace should join me at the next council meeting supporting the motion I'm going to put forward to ask the Chancellor to provide us with funding to lift us to the average in England. I think we live in a remarkable place, and if we can just get average funding, it would make such a massive difference to the council. So I welcome a unanimous vote on that in the council chamber next time round. Thank you. You voted for and supported the increase in national insurance. You voted for the decrease in the universal credit. The cost of living is yours and you need to own it. We've put forward a serious budget which is ambitious, balanced, forward-looking and most of all fair and honest. The Tories' budget proposals include putting up your council tax, stripping away protection for the poorest and selling the family silver. Our roads and pavement funds have been cut by 40%. You're telling residents that you're going to sell the airport, strip out millions of pounds of future funding and that they should be grateful. We've put £750,000 extra into the transport system. You're very proud of your £80,000 additional. What does that buy you? You couldn't answer that. I'll tell you what it buys you. What, two-thirds of a bus? Two-thirds of a bus for a year? That's what 80,000 quid gets you. So I can't wait for you to explain that to residents. As with last year, the Conservative budget would cost taxpayers millions and millions of lost income and lost opportunity as they sell assets to cover for their misleading statements to residents on reserves. It's a Facebook, not a council chamber budget. But I have got a little gift for the councillors over there. Your budget last year, if that had been adopted, we would now be closing libraries and closing swimming pools and closing customer first centres as part of this budget. And I've got a calculation here, which I'm going to give you at the end if you want to stay around so you can see it. And it demonstrates exactly the effects that your budget would have had on these council reserves in last year if we'd adopted it, where we would now be if we had adopted that budget. So if you want to stay around at the end, I can hand it over to you, and then you can never lie again about saying that we just keep on putting council tax up, because you will see the effects of your budget.
Point of order, Chair.
Year on year.
Chairman, point of order.
Chairman,
I think
Councillor Rankin's just called us a liar.
Excuse me, right?
I'll withdraw that. I'll withdraw that. That's absolutely fine. I withdraw and apologise. But you can never again sit and say that we just constantly put up council tax and we've got a choice in this, because you will see what the effect that your budget would have had on the council finances if we'd have adopted it last year. Nothing really more to say other than to thank Janice, Claire and all of the officers who worked so hard to get this over the line. It is a massive team effort, and North Tyneside is incredibly lucky to have such dedicated and skillful officers. Residents are incredibly lucky to have them working on their behalf to keep the council finances safe. I would also like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Ray Glendon. He is hugely missed, none more so than the last few weeks when I could have picked up the phone and spoken to him and had his wit of me tearing my hair out of what was going on with the budget. He made this look easy. Trust me, it is not. I hope I've not let him down. Can we go to the vote?
Thank you. You can't make any points. That was a right to reply. We're going to move on to the vote. We want to vote, Mr. Barton.
So this is the vote on the Cabinet's proposed budget. Councillor Linda Arkley, Councillor Ken Barry, Councillor Lewis Bartoli, Councillor Gary Bell, Councillor Linda Bell, Councillor Liam Bones, Councillor Trish Brady, Councillor Brian Burtis, Councillor Carol Burtis, Councillor Joanne Cassidy, Councillor Debbie Cox, Councillor Stephen Cox, Councillor Naomi Craven, Councillor Eddie Dark, Councillor Linda Dark, Councillor Kath Davies,
4.
Councillor Sarah Day, Councillor Davy Drummond,
4.
Councillor Peter Early,
4.
Councillor Sandra Graham, 4. Councillor Muriel Green,
4.
Councillor Margaret Hall, 4. Councillor Tracy Hallway, 4. Councillor Janet Hunter, 4. Councillor John Hunter, 4. Councillor Carl Johnson, 4. Councillor Hannah Johnson, 4. Councillor Christopher Johnston,
Against.
Councillor Joe Kerwin,
4.
Councillor Frank Lott,
4.
Councillor Wendy Lott,
4.
Councillor Gary Madden,
4.
Councillor Anthony McMullen,
4.
Councillor Janice Moore,
4.
Councillor Jim Montague,
4.
Councillor Thomas Mulvenna,
4.
Councillor Andy Newman,
4.
Councillor Pat Oliver,
4.
Councillor John O'Shea,
4.
Councillor Norman Percy,
4.
Councillor Stephen Phillips,
4.
Councillor Bruce Pickard,
4.
Councillor Martin Rankin,
4.
Norma Redfern, elected Mayor,
4.
Councillor Paul Richardson, 4. Councillor Willie Samuel,
4.
Councillor Jane Shaw,
4.
Councillor Matthew Thirlaway,
4.
Councillor Joan Walker,
4.
Councillor Judith Wallace, Councillor George Westwater,
Against.
Councillor Matt Wilson. So there were 45 votes for and 7 votes against. So the council now has an approved budget.
Thank you, Mr Barton. As a budget and council tax has now been approved, the council meeting provisionally scheduled for the 3rd of March will no longer be required. This concludes the business for tonight's meeting, and thank you all for attending.